go ahead and share my screen again, and let's get the show started. So, love the title. You guys want to tell us what all's dead right now? Because it feels like everything on social media.
Absolutely. I was at the CMO Summit put on by Pavilion. It was here in Atlanta. And this is not my slide. I actually stole it from Infuse. She opened up the talk with everything being dead. And I feel like 2-3 months ago, this was such a cool flair drama kind of entryway into any type of talk. Now everybody's saying that. So at the end of the day, it's like, if everything is dead and we're saying, don't do these 10 things, what is that one thing or two things that we should be doing? Nobody has that answer yet. Maybe it's that marketing is dead and now, your AI tools will be doing marketing for you. Like, this is not an AI webinar, but I feel like this is a good precursor to everything that's dead. It's actually questionable whether it's dead or not. Depends who's asking and why they're saying it's dead. I wanted to start maybe with some intros. I'm Nadia Davis. I'm VP of Marketing at CaliberMind. CaliberMind is in the space of multi-touch attribution, go-to-market intelligence for enterprises. And I'm super grateful to Drew Smith, a friend of mine who is also a connoisseur of all things attribution. Drew, over to you if you want to do a quick intro.
Yeah, thank you, Nadia. So I'm Drew. I'm the founder and CEO of Attributa, which is a consulting firm that specializes in B2B attribution, reporting, data, and analysis. And attribution is one of our favorite topics to talk about, and especially if it's dead or not. So looking forward to the conversation.
Great.
Wonderful.
So this is a great setup to the next slide. But before we get there, actually, let's take the temperature in the room and see what you guys feel about attribution. Whichever way you define attribution, do you feel like attribution ignores the real world buyer's journey? Do you feel like some models may undervalue brand and top of funnel efforts? So maybe it's great for regular go-to-market, but doesn't fit ABM. Or maybe you feel like any attribution model is just fine for anything. If you guys want to pick whichever answer suits your scenario.
Well, then I always get a little bit of a preview before it's over.
My answer, but it excludes hosts and panelists, so I cannot vote. I would pick D, because depending on what question you're trying to answer, various models will work for that. But I'm curious what others would say.
What's the definition of the traditional attribution models here?
Well, I love all the smart people. They're going right for the definitions. So we're starting with just a very general kind of, as attribution is to you, what is that answer?
Okay, so I'll give folks one more pause to go ahead and fill it out. And then, all right, and poll. Let's look at those answers.
Wow. Attribution ignores the real world buyer's journey. That's the top. Well, actually, it's a tie. Undervalue brand and top of funnel efforts. And then we have stragglers where it's great and they're fine. Drew, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit of a mix of two of these. I think that I'm a mix of B and D, because there's a lot of brand efforts that are, not seen by traditional attribution, but they're also just fine because there's methodologies that you can use that leverage attribution data to track the lift of brand. So it's not, it's a little indirect to get to that brand value tracking, but you can still get there. So I'm a mix of B and D.
It's interesting you said that, because at the CMO Summit by Pavilion that I just went to, the conversation around brand was also front and center. So much so that Sangram Bajra, for those of you who know him, he was the VP of marketing for Pardot, and then he was the co-founder of Terminus. He said, your brand is your last moat when it comes to SaaS. So that conversation is definitely top of mind for me as well. But to your point, I think there are definitely creative ways to tell those stories of how the marketing dollars are working allocated to brand for attribution. So Kamala, do you want to go to the next slide? Get us
Sure.
started.
1 second.
And
there you go.
our audience wished to start with the definitions, was my command. So the traditional Bombora definition, and you guys know that. Did you know that there are 17,000 topics in Bombora now? I remember 5 years ago it was 7,000. Now it's 17,000. So you scroll through the endless lines on the Bombora CSV to find your topics. It's just maddening. But their definition is that attribution is the act of determining the value of each customer touch point leading to a conversion. And what I think one of the challenges with this definition, as short and sweet as it is that traditional attribution models, the ones that are dead, they were built for clicks. And the world where things happening in the digital world and you can attribute everything to a click has come to an end because there's just so much nuance. There's so much data everywhere. Everybody's got so many platforms that collect that data, whether that data is normalized and standardized, or it's coming in all sorts of unstructured ways. And then you have buying committees, right? It's never linear. Where in the B2C space, maybe it's click, 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 credit card, and then purchase, right? It's never that in the B2B space. So I kind of share the sentiment and the frustration of those who said that, it doesn't show you the full picture. However, depending on how you instrument attribution, that changes what you get out of it. So if we continue on with the slides, I wanted to touch on these 3 things, which I feel like a lot of confusion around attribution these days comes from a lot of noise all over LinkedIn and other places. I would love to have your take on this, where you have the MTA, MMM, media mix modeling, and incrementality testing. Somehow, some very smart, I'm sure, people, but also with a big voice and big presence, got to LinkedIn and said, don't do multi-touch attribution, do media mix modeling. But wait, don't do that also. Do incrementality instead. And everybody who is trying to keep their story straight to their senior leadership, because at the end of the day, marketing has to have a story that makes sense. They paused and said, wait, so which one of these do I use? And how can I use this continuously? Where what I reported on last month, I can report on this month and show some kind of progression. In most cases, it's up and to the right? So multi-touch attribution tracks and assigns credit to multiple digital touch points. We started with, attribution as it is in one channel. Now it's multiple channels. Customer journey became a thing, right? Real-time movement across the funnel for tactical decisions is also one of those things typical for multi-touch attribution. And of course, all of you heard that for digital first businesses, that's the way to go about it, but it may not capture anything that happened offline. You had a dinner. If you had an event and somebody shook hands at the booth, if you had a phone conversation or the BDR, tried to reach out to this person, maybe had conversations with this person, may not be captured in that traditional MTA model. Then you have media mix modeling, which is really focused on historical trends where you have the time lag of what you can get out of it. You're working with a lot of data that you're trying to analyze. And in my mind, it's never real time. It's more for strategic planning. As we set out to do things for the year, like this is what we did for the last year, 2, 3 years, got to have good data and then have a lot of it, then works for you. And then incrementality testing, that's your A/B. If I did not run this campaign, would I have gotten the same results? Testing also takes time, takes a lot of money. If you got multiple channels where you're spending 50,000 here, 100,000 there, or 100,000 here, 500,000 there, but not millions. Incrementality testing may show you some insights, but not all of it, just because you don't have a lot invested in one channel. Drew, is that a fair assessment of the 3 different approaches or methodologies that people tell you you should substitute for traditional multi-touch attribution?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's a couple things to call out here on this slide. And the first one that I'm going to call out also harkens back to the slide that was like the mural slide about everybody saying everything's dead. When you hear somebody say that, for example, attribution is dead, 95% of the time, it's because they're selling you something different. It's not that the thing itself is actually dead. It's that they're selling something different. And the only way for them to get a foot in the door is by saying that something else is dead. So we have to keep that in mind. Now, the other thing that I think about when I think about multi-touch attribution, media mix modeling, and incrementality testing is each one of these things, they do different things. They serve a different purpose. It's akin to saying, hey, you've used a hammer all of your life to hammer nails into wood. Well, guess what? We have this new tool called a saw. It does something completely different. You should never use a hammer ever again. Well, wait, your tool doesn't hammer nails into wood. It saws wood. Why are they? You need both tools to do the full scope of the job. So I think of each one of these as tools, and each tool has a use case, and some use cases fit your needs better than other use cases. And so it's really mostly important to figure out what are your needs as a business to figure out, is MTA the right solution? Maybe I need media mix modeling. Maybe I need incrementality testing. Maybe I need some of each.
I love this take. Let's continue on with the slides.
Interesting on the key points that MTA is best for digital first. Could you elaborate a bit on B2B marketing where it's leaning more towards non-digital? A lot of time it has to do with different
Absolutely. That's actually so we started with like what the Google definitions, or these days, Gemini will summarize it for you, what you will find for each approach, but it goes way beyond just digital, and we'll talk about that. All right. So again, to Drew's point, what question are you trying to answer? I love the hammer or the saw example, right? Multi-touch attribution tells you which touch points along the buyer's journey progress the velocity of people moving through the buyer's journey towards opportunities, right? There are many questions that you can answer with that, but that's like the key one if you want to think about it in different ways. Media mix modeling, how should I allocate my budget for the biggest return? Again, got to have a lot of data. And then incrementality is what channel of campaign offer the biggest lift. So that's kind of the nutshell, but they're not the same. I guess that's the bottom line. When we're talking attribution, attribution is attribution. It is not something that now is replaced by one of these two. All right, let's continue on. And now that we separated church and state, we want to ask you this question. When your executives ask, what's working in marketing? What is your answer? And this question came from a pain point of mine where in my previous role, I worked for a GovTech SaaS company. We got a new president. He comes in and asks our CMO, so where do our opportunities come from? She flips it over to me because I was leading revenue and marketing operations. And I know the minute I name one channel, the minute I name one tactic, the question that will follow will be, can we 2x it? Can we put more money on it? Can we do 2, 3, 5 times of that? And it's never one thing. And for me, it was never one thing. It was always a combination of things, right? But I wonder how you guys feel about this particular question. How do you answer it? Do we have the critical mass, Kamala? All right. I pieced together a narrative with multiple data points. You guys make it so easy for us to continue on with this presentation. But
I'm
it's
just
the
glad
reality.
nobody selected D. If somebody selected D, we were going to have strong words.
Whatever works, right, Drew? Whatever tells the story. But, that's exactly the pain point within marketing. You try to assemble all of these touch points manually. Why do you do that? Because your systems are siloed, because data lives in different places. Scott Brinker had this great survey that he recently put out, the state of your tech stack. And one of the things that spoke to me is that 66% of marketers said that they're facing challenges with data integrations. And then the other 20% said, by the way, we also got data silos and they're everywhere and we don't know what to do about it, right? So collecting that buyer journey into one place is totally super important. And we started with multi-touch attribution where it lived in the digital space. Why? Because you can collect data from digital places. Your LinkedIn stamps things, your Google Ads stamps things, data that comes through APIs. It's normalized, it's standardized, and assembling that into a buyer's journey is super easy. ABM platforms try to play with it along the same line. And you get insights in real time. The salespeople can act on it. You see who did what so that you can become a part of the conversation. But in reality, the data is never clean. And in reality, the journey is never linear, and you have multiple systems with date stamps that are just all over the place. And when you have a very small controlled environment where you're over the systems where you're running your program in your smaller business, the manual exercise of collecting all of this, like what you guys just said, is it's totally something that I've personally done. You can manage it up to a certain level, but you get to a point where it becomes so overwhelming, it becomes impossible to keep up with it as people ask questions, who did what? And I feel like this is the place where the next iteration of what multi-touch attribution solutions have become, where the data play becomes front and center for you to be able to tell that story of the digital journey. This is where telling stories with marketing data becomes very much the data aggregation, unification, transformation play. And this is where attribution gets this new meaning of what's possible with attribution once your data becomes unified, once it becomes standardized, and the sky's the limit of what questions you can ask to this data, because now all of it is in one place. Drew, is that something that you hear your customers say? Like, is data a challenge for them?
Oh, data is a huge challenge for the vast majority of organizations that we work with. And I really love the idea of telling stories, because ultimately when we use data to tell stories, we don't get so stuck on individual data points. We don't get stuck on things like inconsistencies. I was literally just on with a client right before this where we were looking at one digital touch point that was in the wrong channel. And it was like, if we're telling a story, one touch point in the wrong channel does not change the story in any way, shape, or form. So when you turn it into telling data stories, it forces you to focus on the important stuff and put the non-important stuff to the side. So I love the idea of using marketing data to tell stories.
So that's exactly what the next part of this webinar will focus on. For that, I used a survey that was put out by Benchmark, and it's Carol Dietrich, who I follow. She got a great Substack newsletter, got a lot of great ideas. She was the CMO of Atlassian. If you guys don't know her, she's got huge LinkedIn presence. You should definitely follow her. And then John Miller, who was founder of Marketo and Engagio, collaborated with the other individuals on the slide and put out this report. You can still find it online, go download it. Amazing, fascinating report. But what stood out to me on this report, again, we're on the concept of telling stories as a marketing executive, is that for larger enterprises, look at the 100 million to 200 million and then 200 million and up, majority of marketing storytelling happens within the space of multi-touch attribution. And why is it so? The buyer journeys are super long. How can you justify as a marketing executive why your marketing team has the headcount that it has, that nothing is happening in terms of closed won, but marketing is working so hard, generating new things, putting out new tactics, spending more money over a period of, say, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. In my previous job, it was 20 to 24 months to close a deal. So the CMO had to tell stories of incremental marketing progress towards the North Star of closed won, right? Those were, of course, larger deals, but for 2 years. So what do you have at your disposal if you say, okay, we're going to get rid of MQLs because we don't believe in that anymore. We're on the ABM train. Maybe that will change to GTM, but we'll see. We don't need attribution. We're going to do these other things. If you report on things from month to month, in my current role, I report out on things weekly. So talk about, no pressure, but a little bit of pressure. And the other thing that stood out to me that I thought was interesting is that segment of 50 million to 100 million companies that are probably mid-market, they report on first touch. And I actually have a guess. And Drew, I'm curious about your take on this. I wonder if they all picked first touch, it's because either their tooling provides for first touch, like say they upload the list and they stamp that campaign, whether it's HubSpot or Marketo, like first touch, you know where the lead came from, right? So that's easy to track. Or it's because whatever map they're running, they maybe are not using any sophisticated stuff. Or like in Salesforce, maybe it's just the automatic configuration that came with it. And the enterprise has not evolved on the operational practices enough to go to a more complicated, sophisticated way of measuring. I'm curious on your reaction to the slide and to that specific stat.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things about this slide that jump out at me. The first thing that jumped out at me when I look at this slide is that 44% of organizations at less than $5 million in revenue are using multi-touch. I'm going to be honest with you, they probably don't need it. When you are an organization of that size and scale, you do not have complex enough needs to really truly need multi-touch. I run a marketing consulting firm that specializes in multi-touch attribution. We don't use it. Why? I know every marketing that goes out the door, and I do all our sales. I know what works and what doesn't. We're not complex enough to need it. So I think what you're seeing there is a little bit of a mismatch between the business needs and the tooling that you have. The same thing happens with that first touch at 50%. When you're in 50 million to 100 million, you are in a phase of scaling your organization into being an enterprise, and you need more complex solutions. To be 50% are primarily using first touch, these folks are probably scaling portions of the organization, but not marketing ops, rev ops, and data collection. And that means that when reach that next level of maturity, they're going to be far behind their peers who are using those things. The last thing that jumps out, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to just comment on that. When it looks like people use different models at the same time too, because as you see numbers going along the columns, the critical mass is what we're focusing on, but it looks like people do think, which is a good, heartwarming thought for me. People do think about the questions that they're trying to answer with their attribution model. And that's why, when you add up the total, it's more than 100. It's because people use multiple ways or multiple models to answer different questions. But back to you.
Yeah, the other thing that jumps out at me at this slide is, I don't know if anybody else has seen this, particularly on LinkedIn, that modern day attribution is the cause of all of modern marketing's problems. That everybody uses attribution and it causes us to focus on the wrong things to optimize the attribution model.
You got to blame something when you cannot be effective.
Right. You got to poke the finger somewhere. But what this slide tells me is that, particularly multi-touch attribution, which is usually the target of that exact statement, is not used by more than 50% of organizations outside of large enterprise. So how can something that is not even used by the majority of organizations be the cause of the reason why marketing doesn't work? Doesn't make sense to me. That was another thing that jumped off this slide, is that so few organizations are using any of these models that most organizations don't really know how to use them. And it can't possibly be having a negative impact on their marketing, which counters all those narratives on LinkedIn.
But think about this. You have a small widget company that figured out that they're going to sell something which is different from this. That's their way of evolving it in their own terms, right? They've never worked for a large organization. They don't understand the nuances, the politics, the dynamic, the trust and credibility and influence kind of dimensions within the executive teams, how people report out on what matters, how people lead the team, how people set up individual KPIs for the ICs. All they're focused on is that this methodology and the feature function, click here, add here, divide over here, should be evolving to something else, which they figured out should be the next way. But my question to them is always like, have you ever worked for this larger company? Do you even understand what this reporting means? This reporting serves as a way to align multiple teams. This reporting serves as the backbone of trust. And you're not necessarily splitting the hair over 3% or 2%, whatever calculation they came up with in their better version, right? You're trying to show the movement of the team towards something and use the methodology that everybody is familiar with. Okay, so you're saying it doesn't work. It's this new thing. Great. Is this your day job? To go and educate executives above you and the board and everybody else that they should not be looking at hype, contribution, whatever marketing briefs, they should be looking at XYZ. I think people miss this element, like this dimension of how large enterprises and cross-team collaboration works when they try to educate you on the new widget, but that's usually the ones who are the loudest voices on LinkedIn. Great, let's move on. Another stat that I wanted to bring from the same report was this distribution of the most reported marketing metrics. Like, what are people reporting out, right? If the hypothesis that we have that attribution is dead, like, what are people reporting on? And look at the first metric. It's hype generated by marketing. Why is that so? I mean, it's good to see that everybody's talking in terms of dollars, which is the same unit across the business. Usually marketing reports on engagement. And I understand why, because we are in business to generate engagement, to touch people with our marketing materials, for people to get excited, to engage with us. The rest of the business does not, they speak engagement. They're just not interested in looking at engagement. It's 2 notches below what the business is interested in. Businesses are interested in dollars. Your board speaks in dollars, your finance speaks in dollars, everybody speaks in dollars, right? So seeing that that's the top metric that marketers are trying to report on, as opposed to MQLs, for example, which they still out there. I love MQLs. Great intermediate metric, points your ICs to what they need to do, what engagement level they need to generate over their reporting period, right? But it's good to see that people are moving towards either how much revenue got brought into the business, which, by the way, that's the holy grail of attribution. That's why it exists, right? Versus how many opportunities you generated.
Aren't MQL supposed to be dead too?
I think one of them.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is actually really encouraging, because we actually really recommend that organizations for marketing metrics really primarily focus on pipe gen. And the only reason we don't have or recommend them focusing on new bookings is because new bookings are influenced by so many different things. I mean, every organization loses deals due to legal issues and legal clauses in MSAs and SOWs. That we can't come to an agreement on the legal stuff, so we lose the deal. Should marketing take a hit because we lost a deal because of legal clauses? No, absolutely not. Marketing has nothing to do with that. So we really primarily focus on pipe gen, which I think is really, really important. I think there's another kind of aspect to pipe gen, is a lot of organizations define pipe differently. So for some organizations, it's the creation of an opportunity. But for other organizations, the creation of an opportunity just means that a meeting has been booked and that the pipeline hasn't actually been validated in any way. So they actually have a later opportunity stage that is their pipeline stage. So when I think of pipe gen, you can think of it through both of those lenses, but ultimately what I care most about is that qualified pipeline. So whatever that qualification stage is for the pipeline, that's the thing that I want to measure, because that is a true measure of the quality of marketing. If marketing can get people to a qualified pipeline stage, that's what marketing is really trying to do, is get people that end up becoming qualified pipeline.
Let's move on. Again, to your point, you asked a question in the chat. If we're leveraging multi-touch and incrementality, wouldn't the same exercise and insight be able to help drive pipeline progression? Absolutely. Absolutely. If we're splitting tactics, depending on what size of the company you are and how many people you got to deploy to measuring these things, you can use both. With incrementality, it's usually larger budgets, it's more people, it's a longer period of time that you want to run these things for to really test them. And the resourcing thing becomes a thing. And usually, with complex solutions, people do not invest as much in Google ads just because it's not click to conversion, right? So again, it's resourcing, it's spend, and how much time you got to report on things. But for sure, all of those are part of the same story. All right, next slide. Less than 50% of marketers can measure marketing efficiency. That was the headliner for this specific report within Benchmark report. And what's interesting to me here is that only half of the marketers can tell how much it costs to generate $1 in time. And I'm curious, and also half the marketers know the cost of marketing opportunity. It's back to that question that put me in the corner. Where do our opportunities come from? Well, how much does it cost to generate new opportunity? Well, that's a doozy, because guess what? You're spending on LinkedIn, you're spending on Google ads, you're spending on your webinars and partner syndication programs. All of those things are reflected somewhere. You might be tracking campaign costs in Salesforce. You may be tracking your, budgets and spreadsheets, but bringing it all together, and this is my hypothesis here, it's the instrumentation piece that's lagging. And what happens is, If your MOPS department or your analytics department, maybe it's your demand gen department, depending what size of the company you are, cannot tell that story to your CMO, the CMO cannot go to the executive suite and just be like this on the numbers. It costs us X to generate $1 of pipe. It costs us this much to open one opportunity. And where's my magic 8 ball? This is the friend that I brought, right? Like unless you ask the question to the magic 8 ball, like, how do you know if you're not instrumented to answer these questions? And what happens is that trust gets eroded. Marketing becomes one of those redheaded stepchildren, like one of my favorite smart cartoons, right? Marketing does not earn the seat at the table because you can't answer the questions that you should answer. But what people disregard is that for sales and finance, the other two large departments in the executive suite, right? They operate with great data. They're data-driven. Their data is fantastic. It's either you're generating pipe or you're not generating pipe. You have revenue dollars, you don't have revenue dollars. It's very discrete. It's very black and white, but it's really black and red, right? You don't want to be in the red. But for marketing, you are sitting on this pile of data in all the different places. Your data is murky. It doesn't fit. So to answer these questions for the CMO, it is such a challenge. And yet you're measured on your prowess in the numbers and your ability to report out. So Drew, tell me how off I am with this. And maybe we could ask the magic ball to tell us.
No, I mean, I think that particularly things like marketing cost per opportunity is super, super important to understand, because if marketers think about marketing through the same lens that CEOs and CFOs think about it through, they're thinking about it through the lens of a P&L, right? You want more marketing budget, you got to express that in terms that CEOs and CFOs understand, which is our marketing P&L. If you have a marketing cost per opportunity that's less than your average opportunity size, you have a problem. Marketing is in the red. You are spending more money to get an opportunity than that opportunity is worth on average. That is something that you have to know. Same thing for if your average deal size is less than the cost it took to get that deal, you are in the negative again. You are in the red. It is so important to understand that. Now, when we think about marketing attribution, one of the goals is not just to know if we're in the black or the red. We want to be able to improve. We want to be able to make incremental improvements to our marketing. That's the goal of all of us. Just do better marketing. One of the best ways to do that is to find the marketing channels or tactics that have the lowest or the highest cost per op and have the highest cost per new deal. Those are your least efficient channels or tactics. That's where you take those, figure out why they're so inefficient. And if it's because the channel or tactic itself doesn't do well across the board and not because of a couple of bad apples, then you say, okay, cool, we're going to move budget around to get rid of these channels or tactics that aren't pulling their weight and are having us in the red. Those two metrics right there are some of the most important metrics that a marketer can use to optimize your spend. Cost per op and cost per deal. Those are huge. And most orgs that we work with can't do it. They aren't even close.
And instrumentation, I'm sure, is a problem. Somebody asked in the chat, should you include salary and other discretionary spend? I mean, you can get as creative as you want. The question is, what story you're trying to tell that will determine what you want to pull in, and how is your reporting set out? Can you consistently find this data without having to spend hours upon hours in reporting? And if it becomes cost prohibitive, that's your answer right there. But depending on what story you're trying to tell, like that's the angle here. What is the story you're communicating to the business? What question are you trying to answer? That will determine how you do it. Let's go to the next slide. I want to be mindful of time.
Typically speaking, I don't recommend including salaries and time in spend because, quite frankly, if they weren't working on this campaign, they'd be working on a different campaign. It also gets into the amount of time and energy that it takes to track the time and salary, because most people are not focused on one campaign during a week or a month. They're bouncing around between multiple things. And the infrastructure that has to be built to accurately track time and salary back to campaigns or tactics or channels, it is really, really difficult to get to that point. So from a feasibility standpoint, it's really not feasible. Number two, If they weren't working on X, they'd be working on Y. You'd still be spending the money there anyway. So I don't like doing time and salary at all. I don't recommend it.
Sure, thank you for stopping me there. I think that's one thing. And the other thing that comes to mind, like if you're on the tracking side of the business, if you're MOPS or analysts, does that mean that everybody's salary will now be available to you to plug into systems? Like that's a problem too. Like, confidentiality is also a problem. So no, we're talking program spend. We're talking things, marketing dollars that go into the marketing budget before the headcount. And here's the stat that I mentioned earlier. Like all of these challenges that people are experiencing, right? The 66% that I mentioned, there's people that are challenged with all this data, whether it's the cost data, whether it's the specific platform data, bringing it all together is so difficult. But some clever people figure out how to bring it all together. And then they realize, whoa, I just created a world of duplicates. And the other prop that I brought to this webinar, somebody was the Vector, actually, the name of the company. They got so clever with the swag that they were giving out at one of the events. They did this thing, Marketers Against Humanity. They did the cards, right? But the two cards that I pulled out, these two cards, and what they read is this: the real reason we missed our KPIs is because a CRM database is 90% duplicates. Like this is so true. You pull this data together and then it's a mess. And then you get back to lack of skilled resources to unwind it. It's too complex. And then you run out of budget, right? For all of these things. So it seems like figuring out your instrumentation before you jump into measurement is just as important as doing your math division exercises.
I was actually typing a response to Ryan in the chat about looking back to spend. And so I kind of missed what you said there, but because I'm answering your question, not because I'm not paying attention.
Fair. Let's keep going. Everybody loves the stats. Let's go to the next one. I think I got one more. Oh, we're actually back to the journey. So talking about the systems and what we can measure versus easily, I should say, versus the things that are out there, but take a minute to collect. All of these things that I showed here, and that's probably when you pull together your journey, your customer journey on the slide, when maybe you're doing a post-mortem or maybe you're doing the anatomy of a buyer presentation, you can pull all of these things together for either one account or, sometimes it's one person. But if we go to the next slide, the reality is such that the buyer's journey is also augmented by all of these other touches. So you can argue that your 5 clicks drove the deal, that your ABM platform and the 6 QA is the only reason this deal converted. But look at what the BDRs did, falling. Look at the Sendoso gifting that happened. Look at all the sales emails that went out, the in-person meetings. Maybe somebody shook hands at a meeting or had a dinner, like the sky's the limit. So I think the challenge becomes, Kamala, if we go to the next slide, is how do we bring the two worlds together? And that's back to the Scott Brinker's report, right? It's the 20% of people being challenged by the data silos, and they have this constant need to adapt. We ran a campaign here, didn't work. Now we're dealing with change. What do we do with our reporting? Do we reset our data structure? Do we reset how things get brought in? All of that is top of mind for people. And then if your answer is just go deploy AI to it, well, the data privacy concerns become paramount, and that trend is growing. So if we continue on with the slides, wouldn't it be nice if we could bring all of these journeys that happen in parallel, offline and online together, where you solve the challenge for the marketing silos, you solve the challenge for normalizing, standardizing, and modeling your data, where you can make your LinkedIn stuff and your Google Ads stuff and your Salesforce stuff and whatever else you got. Maybe you have an app with user engagement. You want to bring that in for your upsell and cross-sell, right? Bring it all together into one system so that you can tell the story of how marketing efforts move the needle for your business. And I think this is what is so hard for people to get to. Clearly, that's the space where CaliberMind plays. But we see that as the biggest challenge. And the bigger the enterprise you are, or maybe you're mid-market, go into enterprise, the more data you have, the more data complexities you have, the more silos. So for the CMO to have this full picture and to tell this full story of how marketing moves the needle becomes extremely, extremely difficult. And justifying that budget becomes difficult. And I have this line, your analytics should tell a story, not start a debate. In a lot of cases, it starts a debate because you did not see something happening over here because you couldn't pull that data in. I would be curious to hear your take on this. But I feel like those metrics that we were told should be dead are still super important to tell parts of the story. Your MQL, yes, it's important because your ICs should have a goal. People that drive engagement, your email managers, your demand generation managers, what are you going to tell them? You're responsible for $500,000 in revenue per year. And they will be like, should MQL be that metric for them? Absolutely. Now, will you send it over to the sales team? Well, that depends. I would say don't send it to the sales team because they would know what to do with it unless you show them the buyer's journey of that MQL, but that's a different conversation. This is where the notion of attribution comes into play. Attribution of what? Attribution of marketing efforts towards moving the needle. Attribution of, marketing budget dollars spent to engage people. Absolutely. And then, the other side of this is that we have all of these insights, but we cannot act on them because they're half-baked. So we're data rich and insights poor. And when you send stuff to the sales team, you ask them to act on it. They're like, well, you told me go engage with this person. I don't know what they did. You told me this is a 6QA account. I have no visibility into the journey. And how do you tell that story? Again, how do you convey all this knowledge of what campaigns you saw this account into the salesperson who is time poor, nor do they have the patience? I made this mistake once. I sent my sales team to 5 places in Salesforce. I was so proud of myself because I figured out how to break all of these different systems and boil them down to 5 places in Salesforce. Oh, there was 4 places too many. They didn't want to do 5 places and who can figure out what their journey was. They wanted 1. Drew, is that something that other people struggle with? I want to say yes, but I want to hear your validation.
Oh, totally. Absolutely. I think there's generally a mismatch between what marketing reports and what's expected to be shared. The main reason for that is just metrics that matter is a really simple statement. And it can lead to somebody saying, oh, well, this matters to me. But does that matter to your audience? The person that you're sending the report and the data to, that is really, truly what determines if the metrics matter. If I'm sending a report to somebody whose job is to get emails out the door and write compelling email copy, email clicks matters to them. But if I'm sending a report to the board, email clicks doesn't matter to them. They don't care. So the metrics that matter are really, really aligned to the person that is receiving the data and the information. And so if you just focus on what matters to you and not the person that you're sending the data to, you end up with misalignment and mismatches. This is why a lot of times we spend 6 hours building this amazing deck. And then within 3 slides, the person that's receiving it is tuned out, checked out, not paying attention, and doesn't care.
Pamela, if we go to the next slide, I feel like this is going to be my shameless plug. Ultimately, that is what CaliberMind, and there are other vendors out there, so go check them out, but that is ultimately what CaliberMind solves for. How do you tell the story of the customer journey? How do you tell the story of how people go through your marketing funnel in a way that speaks to the level of the audience that you're reporting to and gives you the visibility, not just into the report, but allows you to double click, triple click, self-serve, democratize that data across the org, and maybe apply some AI insights as to what else could I extract out of this data. And I feel like attribution in a way that short step, because nobody tried to bring all that data together. Nobody tried to model it. Nobody tried to transform and unify it so that you're looking not at a subset, which will be different by system. You're looking at all of it in one place, right? Your CRM tells part of the story. Your LinkedIn tells the other part of the story. Maybe your Google Sheets where you're tracking something else. Maybe your branded queries and from Google Query, right? All of that should be brought together. And then your stages of the funnel become meaningful because it's not just what the ABM platform saw, right? It's the funnel stages that you define based on all of the data available to you. You can look at search scoring and accounts that are relevant that now you want to send to the sales team, and they can double click into that and see all the things that people did. It's not just like, okay, you send me Microsoft. You said it's hot. Well, there's 10,000 people in Microsoft. Who do I contact, right? And this is where your MQLs become important. Well, let me see all the people that got engaged. For us, we do generative AI summaries where it shows you the entire buyer's journey. and all of the members of the buying committee that got engaged. So your salesperson says, okay, show me everybody who was engaged in this account, and boom, for the last 6 months, 12 months, however long they go back, you have all of the names. You know exactly what they did. You know when they did it. And if you need recommendations of the next steps, that's also something that could be done, right? So that's the lens through which attribution should be viewed. It's the buyer's journey. It's telling the story with the data that goes way beyond the simplistic math division equation, right, that it used to be. So if we go to the next slide, what I wanted to show you that, again, back to the notion of attribution being dead. Within our tool, attribution clearly is one of the most popular modules that people look at. And what we see is that 20,000 in-app page views out of all the pages within the app go just to measure attribution. Now, of course, you can ask other questions to this report. My favorite one, because there's Gemini that runs under the hood, we'll call that feature Ask Cal. I always want to know what other things are out there that I'm not considering. So I would say, what other questions can I ask to this data? My report is two-dimensional. Here it's sorted by campaign, but what if there are other things I'm not thinking about that I should optimize for, right? So what questions do I ask for? This data is a powerful thing. But again, to the notion that attribution is not dead, Drew, I'm sure for you, attribution is not dead because you're in business to consult on attribution. To me, that's the biggest validation that look how many enterprises are using it. And for us, it's the most popular application within it. So curious about your comments.
I think that the reason why a lot of people say that attribution is dead is because attribution on this slide is literally one little piece over here that is the end output of all of this work that is done to collect, create, and curate data. This one little piece over here is what we all think about when we think about attribution. We all miss everything else over here about all the creation, collection, curation of data. So if you think about attribution as just this here, maybe attribution's dead, maybe it's not, depends on the needs of your business. But all of this stuff that's happening to power attribution, you cannot convince me that all of this stuff is dead. It is not. Because whether you do attribution at the end or not, all of this is incredibly valuable.
That's actually a good call out. Because depending on what questions you're trying to answer, it all starts and stops with whether or not you have data that helps you prove your hypothesis or prove your hypothesis wrong. So the one thing that I want to end with, like I know in my life as a marketer, and I've been at it for going on 20 years, ABM made the biggest difference in terms of how you go to market, how you report, right? And the debate over should you have the person funnel, should you have the account funnel, the ABM systems told us it should be all the account funnel. Kim, if you want to go to the next slide, I always ran into this notion that I need both funnels. I need to watch my MQL metrics and attribute marketing activity to how people progress through the funnel, right? And I want to track my account level metrics, and some of that would be in the ABM platform. And here, the example that I used, actually, that's the funnel that I'm using today. That's for me to be able to set goals for the ICs. And again, you want to attribute revenue or, do a division exercise based on number of people, totally be my guest. But attribution tools have evolved in the way where now it's not just the journey. It's not just the simplistic, show me the path that you can track, but it's also being able to tell the stories to the business through the funnel lens, because funnel is one of those things that's dead also. If we go to the next slide, you will see the account funnel. I want to create definitions that are flexible, that fit my business and how my business collects data. Drew, to your point, which you pointed out, like look at all this stuff that's happening, the data complexities, the architecture, the infrastructure that's in the back. How can I pull out output and how can I model it in a way that I know fits my business? Because guess what? In my previous business, the CMO did not feel like email should be one of those things that contribute to any type of scoring, stage definition, or insights for the sales team. There were reasons for that. For your business, it would not be the same. For many businesses, email is the driver of business, right? So I feel like this flexibility and customization are so important to consider when you do whatever reporting you want, funnel velocity, whether you're in buyer's journey. And having the ability to do so is what people are challenged with. And that's why everything is dead. If it's hard for me to do, guess what? It's dead. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Let's go to our next slide. I feel like we got just a little bit of time left. And I think this is the summary of like, what are the takeaways? Attribution is the way to tell marketing stories. I mean, we can call it multi-touch attribution. We could call it, whatever a new word you want to add to it. But at the end of the day, that's you reporting how marketing did to contribute to each closed one, how marketing spent the dollars that it was trusted with, and how well the CMO, the marketing leader, VP of marketing, is doing their job. How much did we contribute? Did we provide full visibility? Did we arm the sales team with insights into which accounts are hot, which accounts are at the middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, whatever it is? And answering the questions on the fly. What's the cost of getting new opportunity? What's the cost of one pipeline dollar on the marketing side? Where do our opportunities come from? These are all the questions that essentially determine the influence of the senior leadership in the C-suite that come down to the boots on the ground, to the marketing, team or teams to solve for. If you cancel out attribution, if you deprecate that, like Google tried to do with the cookies, which they realized time yet, but anyways, how are you going to tell this story? You're going to educate the world that this is new and improved, and then what? Then that doesn't work, and then you hot seat. Providing clarity to sales, making sales your best friend. That's also buyer's journey. That's also what your attribution tools, CaliberMind included. How in depth can you do that if you don't model your data, if you don't collect it on the back end? And ultimately, give people the ability to click into things, to experience all the report running for themselves, so that it's not your word against theirs. It's democratizing that data. Oh, you wanted to see buyer's journey? Here you go. Click here, here, here. You can double click and see who those people are within the buying team that are engaged the most. And that's what the ultimate measure of trust is in larger companies. You'll be able to self-serve. Things not being gated by the marketing team. Things being available for people to match those numbers and making sure that those numbers match to whatever reporting system, usually your CRM, they're using. Did I miss anything, Drew, from what you see in terms of how we tell the story?
No, I think that one of the things that I like to think of in terms of how we tell the story is just, think of this as a novel. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to populate the novel. The start of the novel is when we start engaging with an account. And the end of the novel is when they become a customer. And all the chapters in between are all the different things that they engage with on that journey. And the order of the chapters is really important because you have to have a consistent story to tell. All the people that you engage with, those are the different characters that populate the chapters. And so if you think about it in terms of creating this novel about each opportunity that came in and populating the chapters with all the stuff that they did and populating the characters with all the people that we engaged with, it kind of makes this all seem a lot more simple than this big mess of spaghetti that we're trying to make sense out of. Think of this in terms of that type of a narrative with chapters and characters that leads to somebody becoming a customer with our organization.
And I think this is all we had. You guys were so super engaged in the chat. Pamela, the chat has exploded. I don't even know how to handle it. I'm sure we're going to look through all of it, and I will reach out and answer if there were any questions that were aimed specifically at me. I know we're at the top of the hour. Drew, would be okay if people found you on LinkedIn? Like, that's the best way to connect with me if you guys have questions for me.
Absolutely. Yes. If you have questions or even just want to talk attribution, you don't have a question, you just want to chat.
Hit him up at 11 o'clock. 11 o'clock at night is the time when Drew wants to talk attribution. Do it.
I don't know about that, but yeah, send me a note on LinkedIn. If it's 11 o'clock at night, I'll probably respond the next morning. But yeah, my LinkedIn's open.
Wonderful.
Drew, thank you so much.
Well,
Thank you.
We are at time. Thank you both very much for sharing your knowledge, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day.